We're starting our reading of Great War literature with 3 short poems by Siegfried Sassoon. Later in this module, in the Shell Shock unit, you'll read another Sassoon poem. Before we talk about the poems themselves, let's get to know Sassoon a bit. Siegfried Sassoon was one of 3 brothers in a very wealthy and well-connected family. His father left the family when Sassoon was very little, then died when Sassoon was 8 or 9 years old. Sassoon grew up on the family estate in southeast England, riding horses, playing cricket, and learning to be an English gentleman. He went to school at Marlborough College and Cambridge University. He wasn't a great student. When he finished his studies at Cambridge, he returned home and devoted himself to fox hunting horses and to cricket. Sassoon joined the army the day war was declared, going in first as a groom to military horses. His own horses were confiscated for military use at the beginning of the war, and shortly afterwards taking a commission as second lieutenant in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, an ancient and respectable regiment. In the army, he was known as Mad Jack for his acts of insane bravery. He was given the Military Cross, as well as lesser medals for his gallantry. He was wounded several times and also contracted trench fever, so he spent the first 3 years of the war alternating between the front and hospitals. During a convalescence in 1917, he wrote a statement against the war. It simply said that he thought the government had either lied to the public about the reason for the war or that it had changed what it was fighting for. He thought this would in turn mean that the government wouldn't be able to work toward a negotiated peace, and thus the war would continue to go on, maybe forever, Sassoon and a lot of other soldiers thought. His statement against the war was an act of military insubordination, because in it he said he refused to continue fighting under these circumstances. The army had a problem now. The proper way to deal with this would be a court-martial and military punishment. But Sassoon was a war hero, as well as connected to some of the most prominent people in Britain. The solution the army came up with was to send Sassoon to Craiglockhart War Hospital, outside of Edinburgh, Scotland. There, he was treated by W.H.R. Rivers, a psychiatrist who was one of the most humane and successful doctors for shell-shock patients. It's important to note that Sassoon was not shell-shocked at this time. In Rivers's admission note, which you can find online, he describes Sassoon as healthy and showing no signs of war neurosis. Sassoon was a patient at Craiglockhart for several months until he agreed to give up his protest and return to the war. He survived, and after the war helped to get into print the work of fellow poets who had died in the war. Sassoon is known for deeply ironic, even bitterly ironic verse, and for frequently using the vernacular voices of common soldiers, including slang terms that proper gentlemen wouldn't be caught dead using. The 3 poems we're going to look at now show Sassoon in 3 different moods. First, let's look at Sassoon's poem, The General. Here, you can see the use of vernacular when the soldiers call the general a cheery old card, and when the poem's speaker says that the general did for them both in the last line of the poem. Arras is a town where Britain fought a great battle to no particular effect, but great loss of life. The poem demonstrates one of the things we talked about in the Great War intro video, that there were frontline officers among the soldiers in the trenches who shared their suffering and their experiences, but also staff officers who worked miles behind the lines, rarely encountering battlefield conditions. These staff officers, like the general in this poem, were insulated from the true experience of the war, and thus often set up battle plans that were impossible to carry out or that caused needless suffering and death for the frontline troops. How does this poem use irony? How can you tell it is ironic? And what do you think Sassoon gains by using the vernacular of enlisted soldiers in this poem? I've provided another video just on the kiss, which is intended in part to help you practice your skills at reading and deciphering poetry. For now, let's just look at irony in this poem. Sassoon wrote this poem while at a training area called the Bull Ring, the first stop for soldiers arriving from England. There, a lusty sergeant major taught the newly arrived troops how to use their bayonets. What evidence do you see in this poem that Sassoon intended for it to be ironic? He said it is ironic, but we don't have to take his word for it. What evidence do you see that it isn't ironic? Sassoon's friend Robert Graves said Sassoon wrote this poem with great enthusiasm after the first day of training at the Bull Ring, and only said later that it should be read ironically. The third poem, Sick Leave, was written while Sassoon was a patient at Craiglockhart. In the poem, the speaker is awakened by thunder and storm that reminds him of storms on the battlefield. He is not hallucinating, but in a kind of waking dream, able to see and talk to his comrades who have died in the war. We can ask our questions about irony again, and also ask how this poem's irony is different from that of the previous two poems. Of course, we feel right away that this poem is tonally quite different from the other poems. This is a good poem to pay attention to formal structures in. Count the number of lines. Pay attention to the rhyme scheme. A, B, A, B, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F. This poem should remind you of a sonnet. It is 13 lines instead of 14, but it is iambic pentameter, and the rhyme scheme almost matches our sonnet's rhyme scheme. This is like a sonnet that has been broken before it is finished. What do you make of Sassoon's use of formal structures to create feelings of unease in this poem?